welcome to another week of my choice. For this week, I wanted to look at some of the games that I had in Gibraltar, because Gibraltar tournament just ended, and one of the games that I really liked was against Grandmaster from Spain, and especially I kind of chose this game because in the next hour, in the game of the week, I'm gonna look at a game that Wang Kao played as white, and the openings are kind of similar, so I thought it would be nice to see what if this line happened, what if that line happened. So yeah, let's dive in. So I played in Gibraltar in 2017, and it was a nice tournament. I really liked it. I would recommend it. I like to go back again. I just have school. So yeah, this is English opening, and so the thing about English opening is that there are so many other ways that black can play, or white can not let black play. So it's kind of tricky. It's a good idea for you to try and have a solid variation against it, something that you know that the ideas make sense, and that's what I tried to do. So I tried to play this line, and I do believe it's called something like a 4-knight variation with g3. I'm not entirely sure why 4 knights. I'm assuming because the knights will come out of c3 and f3, but yeah. So here it's very common for whites to try and play knight c3, and then black would get the chance to put the knight on b6, and the idea is very simple. This knight on b6 is going to kind of dominate the queen side, and then later on you might have ideas with a5, a4 given the chance, and your other knight will go to c6, and so those are the general ideas. So you kind of want to put this knight here, this bishop here, make short castle. Ideally you have this bishop in e6 because it controls this long diagonal, and you might want to think about something like a5 depending on the situation. So these are the basic ideas. So knight f3 is something that's very common. It is possible that here or earlier for white to play e3 and try to do knight e2, and that's also very interesting because then white could have some ideas with d4 or f4, and that knight on e2 isn't really blocking the bishop. So that's something that's if you're thinking about this opening as white, you could consider. And so knight f3, knight c6, castle, so far normal, bishop e7, rook b1. The idea of rook b1 is, to my understanding, to simply try to play like a3, b4, or rook b1 is kind of preparing for a push on the queen side. So a5, I thought a5 was pretty cool because it kind of takes away the ideas with a3, b4. I probably could have played castle first, but I didn't really think it was that different. And so here we kind of reached this position, and you see white played rook b1 here on move 8, and then on move 11 white put the rook to c1, because it kind of makes sense for the rook to be on the c file, because rook on the c file, rooks kind of like open files, don't they? They don't like to be blocked by your own pawns. So that's why rook c1 was played. f6 to simply keep this pawn strong. Now I'd like to take a little bit and think, what would you want to do as white? Some of the options to think about are you are going in a very logical direction so it's not going. You're not going to start thinking about some crazy sacrifice. It's more positional and how you would continue from there. So yeah, take a little bit of time and think, how would you want to continue as white? So what do you think?
I'm fairly new,
It's okay.
so
How do you want to develop your pieces as white?
um, maybe knight to a5,
So you want to try and move this knight?
maybe.
It's not a bad idea because you kind of want to open this bishop.
Open the diagonal and you open your files for your rook.
Yeah, and you see, like, that's why I have these pawns on f6 and e5, so I'm kind of blinding your bishop regardless. So maybe you could think about something more active with this pawn. So maybe moves such as, yeah?
Paul in the chat suggests that knight b5 intending d4.
Yeah, so that was my other question. Well, yeah, I like the d4 idea, but do you think you can play d4 right now? Another move to think about is d3. So, do we have any fans for d3?
Not yet.
d4? Going once?
Not yet, no.
Going twice? Because, like, this is a...
Mateo wants to go d4. Okay.
Alright, okay, so we have one d4 taker. d4 is a very nice move, and my opponent actually did play it in the game, and I was kind of out prepared. And after the game I asked him why did he play that, and he said that he kind of prepared it long ago, and I was like, yeah, I had no idea. I was just going off of my brain, and yeah, he actually, like, it kind of went a little deeper than just here. But okay, let's look at d3 first. So if d3, I have the chance to think about a move such as a4. Even if it doesn't work right now, a4 is the idea because my game as black is in the queen side. So you kind of want to open that queen side so that your rook is active, your bishops are active. See, like, these bishops are kind of all looking this way, all looking this way, this rook, these two knights. So ideally that's something that I would want to do. And the other thing is I could have played queen d7, and my queen is simply just defending these two. Not that they needed defending, but my queen on d8 wasn't really doing anything, and d7 least of all is kind of protecting my pieces. I really don't like hanging my pieces. So that's something that I thought of. And if queen comes to c2, for example, you could just play rook d8 and put more pressure on this center. And I didn't really go too deep in these analysis because it kind of made sense, but these are like some ideas that could be followed, like trying to play c5 and just gaining more space on the queen side. So that's one idea. The other idea that I kind of followed was after d4. I don't want to give up the move. Let's think about the move a little bit. Now think about it for black. What can black do? What should black do? Oh, I do have access to live chat, by the way. I might not look at it like all the time, but I will keep checking at it time to time. So, all right, let's see. Okay, but we're only talking about e takes d4. Why only e takes d4? E takes d4 is pretty obvious. Knight comes to b5 and white's kind of getting that pawn back. So I'm talking about if I take here, knight comes to b5 and then just there's no way I can hold this pawn. So theoretically I could go for something maybe like d3 just to mess up with white's pawn structure a little bit. But e takes d4 is not the only move. So what else? Yeah, knight takes d4 makes sense, right? Because if you were to play knight takes d4, your opponent can't play this knight b5 anymore. But what you have to be careful is when this knight moves, and this knight also moves, this pawn will be weak. So now you have to kind of think about, does knight d4 actually make sense? Like, is it playable? Okay, so knight d4 does kind of make sense and works because if the knight takes, e takes d4, And bishop b7 doesn't work because, first of all, you could think about a move such as take, and for example take here, just simply take this bishop, and now you're attacking the rook and the bishop. But also if bishop takes b7, you if bishop takes b7, you could also simply play rook b8 if you don't really want to calculate, and you're attacking the bishop and the knight, so you are gonna pick some stuff up. Yeah, so Matteo, yeah, he is right. You can take, you're not wrong. And so knight takes and if here knight b5 is played, so knight takes d4, takes with the pawn, and now knight b5. What do you think? Now, before you answer, let's think about what is different with knight b5 here and knight b5 here. So the only thing that's kind of different is that these two knights are on the board, right? So the one way that you could think about it is, now that the knights are not on the board, was this like, what difference does it make? Does it open up something for black? What is open up for white?
The diagonal.
Yes, that is true. For white, the diagonal is open, and these two pawns are under direct attack, compared to here, when this knight was kind of protecting these two. So what is different for black? What advantage does black have?
Maybe more control of the center.
How? You are right, but how?
What do you mean by how?
So you are right. What black could have better control of center, but what move are you thinking?
Oh, for black?
Yes.
C6 maybe?
C6 is, you have the right pawn to move, but a little short on squares. C6 is nice, but white would just take this, and now white's two bishops are kind of opened up. Not completely, but your bishops are also kind of hanging here. They're not really doing anything.
Yeah.
So c5 was the move that I wanted to do, and if take, just rook b8. And the difference is that now this black is the one who's controlling the center. So you had the right idea of controlling the center. And now also this knight is kind of hanging, so there could be some jumping stuff, or a4s, or just a lot of possibilities. So in the game after e takes d4, my opponent didn't play knight b5, and he played knight e4. Now, this pawn is still hanging. I can't play c5 anymore because just take. And realistically, you can't really save the pawn. So what do you think you should do as black?
So do you want to defend that pawn or just use it to mess up their structure?
Do you think you can defend the pawn?
Yeah, is that... I'm not sure.
Okay, so we have some suggestions online about d3 or f5. Okay, we have more d3. Yeah, d3 is actually the move that I played in the game because I kind of, well, f5 is interesting, but the problem is that even after f5, there are a lot of weaknesses. Least of all, this knight comes to c5, still attacking my pawn, and now my bishop, and now this pawn. I didn't really see how to keep it all in order, because even if I take, rook takes, still same problem. Pawn under attack, pawn under attack. And if I don't take it and play something like bishop d5, I think least of all this just could go like this. I think that's, or just even taking with the queen, just simply the simplest moves. And I still lose a pawn, so there's kind of no way for me to actually keep the pawn.
Right, so you might as well make some use of it.
Exactly, and that's why I pushed.
Right.
Because now if, yeah, now if like white tries to take it, like this knight is not really doing anything here. Maybe you want to jump to c5, but this pawn is like already a target. I could probably start doubling up my heavy pieces here to attack this pawn. Maybe you could also think about a move like a4, knight take. You can just take with the knight and attack the bishop, and then the pawn is also under attack. If not, you want to open up this rook. So you have a lot of possibilities. And that's why my opponent didn't take in the game and played rook c3. I take. Now, even though I'm a pawn up, it's still pretty, I have to be very careful because this bishop is kind of weak over here. Whoops. This pawn is weak over here. So white's next move could be something like knight c5. So, knowing that, yeah, I am scared as black too, Paul. Yeah, so I was. But now think, what do you do? Think about a move. Also, another thing is rook d1 could be coming up. So your queen is not safe here. I've said enough. So maybe try to think about what move you would want to do.
How about queen c8 or rook to, I mean b8?
I do like the idea of queen c8 because you're simply protecting the bishop and the pawn. So that's something that I would think about more seriously. But I think the question is, after queen c8, what do you think white can do? Because queen c8 does make sense to play as black, but also your queen is going to c8, and then this rook is against the queen and still has its own problems. Alright, so Queen c8 is the move that I played, and yeah, we have some questions about doubling the rook up, maybe more concerns than questions. But like rook c1 does make sense, because rook c1 you're simply trying to attack, but c6 kind of strengthens my position up a bit, because now this pawn is defended, this pawn is defended, and the only thing that knight d5 could be coming up, or maybe even knight d5 here, just to save up a tempi. So my opponent played knight c5, so I think the idea was that since the position is open, since the center is open, my opponent wanted to try and exploit the idea of like how two bishops like open center, which is kind of cliche, but it's also true. So probably that's why my opponent did that, and I completely agree with it. I would have done the same if I were white, and that idea is knight c5. So after knight c5, I missed finding the best move on the board. So think about intermediate moves. This is kind of not easy at first glance, and that's kind of why in the game I also didn't find it, but it is kind of interesting, so let's try to find it.
Knight to d5.
Be careful, because this bishop could be taken with check. Yeah?
Not bishop to c5.
Bishop takes c5 is the move that I played in the game, and it is a good move, but it's not the best one. Bishop takes c5 is kind of the most straightforward one, and there's nothing wrong with straightforward, but I'm trying to see if anybody is seeing the move. I haven't seen it yet. So, okay, the way to think about it is, alright, so this knight is kind of annoying over here, attacking your bishop, and this pawn is falling. So you have two options. Either you have to take it, or you have to come up with something super smart.
That's bishop g4. That's too crazy.
A little too crazy.
Okay.
So the thing is, you don't I don't want to give up the move. Alright, I'll just say it. The move is with this bishop, but not the squares that I've heard so far. Okay, so not bishop g4, let's see, not bishop c4 or f7. Also be careful when you move this bishop, like if you go to f5, queen e5, queen e7. So nope, not bishop g4. Why everybody likes bishop g4? Okay, I'll wait for, nope, not bishop c4. I'll wait for another 30 seconds and then I'll just say it. Because I've already said the move is with this bishop and we're kind of running out of squares. Think, when this bishop is not here and this queen is over here, this queen and this rook could be in a fork, ideally. But you can't do that. Yes, I got, well, I mean, I kind of hurt all of the squares. But yeah, bishop d5 is the move that I should have played. Now if queen takes e7, you can just simply take here and play knight d5. And if like the queen can only pretty much play like queen e6, because now like we would enter something like this, or I could just try and wait, hold on. I do have to take, but now my rook is under attack. Oh yeah, I could just play something like rook e8, or yeah. So I assume that bishop h3 also works by the same logic, but I think the problem is with bishop b7. Like if you wanted to just open up something for the exchange of the bishops and open up the d5 square, the bishop h3 logic works, but bishop b7, I don't think it's that pretty for black. So queen c8, knight c5, bishop comes to bishop should have came to d5. Now if queen takes, you can just take this guy and play knight d5. The thing is, well, with fork, like white could try to save the queen, but I'm pretty sure I can just take on c3 and then just b6, and I have, it's a rook and one pawn against this two pieces. Not as ideal as you would want. So that's kind of why probably my brain wasn't really thinking about it in the game, because who wants to give up two pieces for one rook? So yeah, bishop takes c5 is also a very nice normal move, but well, it would have been awesome if for me if white just took it back immediately. But that's not the move that white played, and logically, because there is an intermediate move. So think about what this intermediate move is. This part of the game was kind of a little like, I take this, you can't take that. So you had to really keep an eye on what was under attack, like because I'm a pawn up. So if white just plays simple moves, I had the upper hand and I had advantage. So white kind of had to come up with some of these like supposedly crazy ideas. So think about takes and think about what stuff are hanging. But I'll tell you right now, rook takes c5 is not the right move. So what do you think is the move? Okay, so let's think about it like this. The pieces that are kind of under attack are these, whoops, right? That's potential for attacking for white. So rook c5 is one of it, but it's kind of super straightforward, and if rook c6, I'm pretty sure I can just play c6 and I have one more pawn. So the move that you should thought about is take on b7. Let's see. Okay, so we have some people who suggested bishop takes b7, and the idea is, well, if you take queen takes b7, simply queen takes e6, you move this guy, rook takes c5. Now you gave back the pawn, and now the material is equal, and these pawn structures are kind of a little sucky, and also white's pieces are very active. So the idea is that if you were to straightforward take it, but in chess we kind of ideally try to train ourselves to think about checks first. So find me a check, I guess. It's like a lot about intermediate moves, because bishop takes b7, your immediate response is kind of take it back, but you can't because it's not the best move. It's kind of a pretty bad move. So you come up with an intermediate move. So what is that intermediate move? Yes. Okay, so we have some people finding the move. Yeah, bishop b2, bishop takes f2 is the right move, because bishop takes f2 is pretty much the only move that keeps you in the game, because if queen takes b7, you're simply worse, and now black is the one kind of fighting to equal the position. So bishop takes f2, rook takes f2, you take the bishop back, king h8. Now ideally for white kind of wants to keep this edge up, because the point is that if it's black to move again, black could try and play something like knight d5. This rook is not doing anything here, so rook e8. Maybe this rook comes to d8, maybe this pawn. If this knight is on d5, then knight is also kind of protecting this pawn. So like black has these ideas. So for white, it is best to try and take out the one piece of black that is kind of hiding but is strong. So this queen is hiding, but it's very strong. See, it's in this diagonal. If black could play like rook d8, maybe rook d1, black could try and organize an attack. And that is why my opponent, who was a grandmaster, I forgot to say that, played queen c6. And you know, like we've always heard, if you're a material down, don't try to exchange pieces, don't really go down to end games, like try to keep the game live. But in this specific situation, or like there are situations that generally that idea that if you have more material, exchange stuff off and go to endgame is right. But in this specific situation, queen c6 was the move that the position needed, because after queen c6, I do have to take it. And now white kind of has compensation, and white has really nice ideas to keep pressuring this pawn, and white is way more active. So yeah, the way the game followed was I could have thought about rook f7, but I thought it's really passive, and I really wanted this knight to just do something instead of being dead over here. So I played knight d5. Now, what do you think white should do? Keep in mind that rook c2 doesn't work because of knight b4. That was another little trick that I opened. So, what do you think white should do? Yeah.
Bishop f6.
Be careful, because it is well defended. What you could think about is this rook isn't really doing anything right now, so try to activate this piece. Okay, yeah, we have suggestions with rook d2, maybe bishop d4, bishop to a3. Yeah, I like these ideas. So you kind of want to try and I don't really understand bishop a3, because bishop a3, even though you're like temporarily not letting knight b4, I could just play something like rook f7, or just play rook c8 and keep this pawn. And now I want to play knight b4. And like, even if rook c2, you're not really attacking this pawn, so I could probably even just play rook d8. And this knight here is very strong, protecting everything. So you do have to play rook d2. So if rook d2, now knight b4 works kind of, because if you were to play like rook d8, there might be this rook c5s that keep attacking your knight. Now you do have to move the knight, and regardless of where you go, your c7 pawn falls. So I don't think rook d8 is a bad move, but probably not the most accurate one. So knight b4, you're willingly giving up c7, but you're taking a2 in return. It does look a little bit sketchy, to be honest, but since my knight can come back to b4 anytime I want, it's not as scary. If bishop a3, you can just play knight b4. And the rook endgame is most likely going to be a draw if white tries to push way too hard. There could, like, let's say white tries to play rook d4. I could just simply play rook a1, Or I could just play rook comes to b7, b8. If you play rook c4, keep attacking my pawn, then I could just probably give you a check, and even though this pawn would fall, the rook endgame is still a draw. You just have to be careful not to get mated over here because of your weak back rank. So that's why bishop h3 wasn't really played. Rook d7. It is kind of, again, cliche that we've always heard that rooks like the 7th rank, but it's also true, rooks are very strong on the 7th rank. Now, you are attacking this pawn, you might have ideas with rook a7. So, how do you want to continue as black? Keep in mind that rook g8 does not work. First of all, why doesn't rook g8 work? Now you can think about getting a little sacrificey. So what is the move we're thinking about? See, this king here kind of feels a little suffocated, right? So how can with white try and exploit it? Okay. Yeah, see, the problem is bishop takes f6. And if you try to take it back, bye-bye. So it is, rook g8 doesn't work. So after saying rook g8 doesn't work, you have to start thinking about how, well, you can't just let white start roaming around in your 7th rank. So how can you try to activate your pieces? Rook g8 doesn't work. So we play rook d8, especially because ideally you would want to trade off one of these rooks so that white doesn't have as a strong as a grip on the 7th rank. In the game, my opponent played rook g7, but he kind of should have played rook a7. And the idea is rook a7. If I take this guy, oops, mate. If I take this guy, same problem. So rook comes to here. Now the next move could even be something like rook a5. Whoops. So I have to try and save my king with a move such as h5. And now this pawn goes. And this endgame is a still draw, but I'm the one who has to kind of be very careful and suffer and all of those fun stuff. So In the game, Rook G7 made my life a little bit easier because check, and well, theoretically white could have given a perpetual now, but white kind of thought that because this pawn is passed pawn, this pawn could become something big. Now, do you think after, so king does have to go to G2. Now, this is kind of another critical position because some of the moves actually lose, and you kind of only have few moves that keeps you the draw. So take a little bit of time and find these final moves.
Whose move is it?
It is black to move.
Black?
Yep. Oh, thank you, Caesar. I've actually never had online. I'm not a very big online streamer, so
We've never gotten that much for a lecture before.
oh, well,
So that's
thank
why.
you. I like to set records.
There you go.
Okay, let's see. People in the chat are thinking about, we have a move knight c3. Actually, I did think about a move knight c3 in the game. Not the move you should be thinking about, just a tip. But so be careful because, okay, let's see why knight c3 is wrong. Then maybe it will help us find the right move. So if knight c3, whoops, white just pushes. Now if you try to bring your knight, it's a little too late because ideally white wants to get to this position. Now white wants to kind of mate you. So you could try to give like a check here and maybe another like check here and try to, you know, get something out of the game. But the problem is just king e1. And this, if this a5 pawn wasn't here, then you know, it was awesome because I could just play rook a1 and win. But I can't, and so yeah, that is the problem. So this is what white wants to get at. White wants to have that pawn on h6, give a check on g7, push my king to go to f8, and try to play rook h8 mate. We have a question about rook, no rook g3. Yeah, because okay, so here you can't. Yeah, you can't really play rook g3 because now my king is kind of a little freer. I'm actually probably check, check, check because, hold on. What is the good move with rook g3? Oh yeah, the problem is that simply there is no more mate. So I can just play rook e8 or even rook b8. It pretty much, let's put the rook to b8, so have them both kind of safe. And if you give a check, this is still a little scary, but it's not mate, and it is draw. And if you try to bring your rook back, now I can try to give a check and try to give you another check, and I don't really see how white can be saved. So that is the problem with knight c3. Now that we know what white, whoops, going way too back. now that we know what white wants, think about how black can try to prevent it. Remember, white ideally wants to have this pawn on h6, give a check over here, and then mate you, so that pawn on h6 is controlling the g7 rook. So I'll give it another minute and then I'll just tell the move, because it is very interesting, but I know my games are very interesting, but we have to get to one close game. Okay, so what I thought about in the game, even though it was good, there were other moves that could have worked, but maybe just not as simple. So my idea was that if this pawn wants to come to h6 and this rook wants to come to g7, if I have something that's defending this square, for example, let's imagine that I play rook b5, and now if rook g7, whoops, now if you play like h5, I could just play rook g5. If h6, well, rook g7 doesn't work anymore. So that's kind of why my opponent wrapped up the game by check, 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 and he ended it in a draw. But the problem was that if I were to play knight c3, that rook wouldn't get there in time. Another move that I could have done, but I didn't really see in the game, was f5. Now if h5, I could give a check and now bring the rook to b6, because again, if h6, I have this rook g6. So another thing is, if white tries to give the check first and then play h6, we could take this guy. And now I'm just a piece up and a pawn. So the idea is that white can't really play this. Theoretically, white still, well, it's check, but for example, in this situation with rook b5, if white were to play check first and then h5, I could just play rook g5, or I could take on h5. Now if you take, I just take this rook. So probably here my opponent would have started to give some check, but now it's not draw anymore. So yeah, oh, okay. So so now we know the problems, we know the ideas, and we know how the game ended. Just a quick recap. So what does white want? White wants to have that pawn on h4, on h6, this rook to g7, and give me mate. So the next few moves that I do should be about getting some piece to defend my king. And simply having my knight come to c3, whoops, simply having my knight to come to c3 and e4 isn't enough, because my knight doesn't get there in time to stop the attack. So I need to have a rook near my king. So I could either achieve that with rook b5 and then rook g5, or I could achieve that, whoops, with f5 and then rook b6, maybe rook g6, or just to control over here. So that was the idea, and I played rook b5, and this is how the game ended. Well, this was pretty fun. I hope you enjoyed it. We did have a lot of interesting ideas in chat. It is not very easy to find these kind of moves, especially over the boards, when you just feel like, oh my god, I've blundered something, now I'm mate. So yeah, I hope you tune in for the game of the week, which probably starts in about 5 minutes. So yeah, until next time.